What's up guys, welcome to my Guardian Druid tank guide for Legion patch 7.2.5. Now in this guide I'm going to go over your spells and abilities, your talents, your artifact traits and relic choices, your stat priority, and then your tanking priority if you will, or rotation if you want to call it that, as well as demonstrations of that in both a Mythic Plus type setting as well as a raid boss setting. And then just some macros and add-ons that I use that you might find useful. Now for quick and easy browsing, I have included timestamps in the description below, so you can click on those and skip to the sections that you want to see. Now I want to start with your spells and abilities, and I will begin by making mention of your raid, which is your alternative resource. And essentially you start at 0, and then auto attacks as well as and certain abilities will generate rage. And it goes up to 100, and then you can spend it on other abilities. And outside of combat, it will return to 0 slowly, so it will decay over time. The first ability I want to talk about is Mangle. And so this ability generates 5 rage for you. It's a melee ability, has a cooldown reduced by haste, and it just hits the target for a good amount of damage. Looks like this. And note that it does do more damage against bleeding targets. Next up is your Bear Bleed called Thrash. And this does damage to enemies in an 8-yard radius around you. Same cooldown as Mangle, reduced by haste as well. And then it applies a dot or damage over time to these targets, and it generates 4 rage. So it looks like this, and it actually stacks up to 3 times baseline. So every time you use it on a target that already has a stack, as you can see, it will go to another stack and do more damage. Next up we have Moonfire, and we can use this in bear form without going out of bear form, as you can see. And it just applies a little bit of damage and then a damage over time effect, which lasts for quite a long while. And then we've got Swipe, which has the same range as Thrash, so 8 yards around you, and just does damage. So it looks like this, doesn't generate any rage or cost any rage. Now we also have Maul. Now Maul costs 45 rage now, so I'll build up some rage here so we can check it out. And it basically just does a crap ton of damage. So it's our hardest hitting ability, costs 45 rage, and it looks like this. You just do a bunch of damage. Now in terms of using rage defensively, we do have one main ability called Iron Fur, and this ability costs 45 rage normally. And what it does is it just boosts your armor significantly for 10 seconds. Now if you use multiple Iron Furs, instead of increasing the duration, it kind of overlaps. So say I use another one here, you'll see I get 2 stacks. Now the first stack will still end after the original 10 seconds, but the second stack, will also last its 10 seconds, and if you use it multiple times, it will overlap in that sense, but it won't stay, it doesn't refresh the duration of the original Iron Furs. Now we also have a self-heal called Frenzy Regen, and Frenzy Regeneration costs 10 rage, has a cooldown reduced by haste, and it heals you for half of all the damage that you've taken over the last 5 seconds. And then there is a minimum, it will heal you for at least 5% of your maximum health. Now defensively we do have a few cooldowns. The first is Bark Skin, 1.5 minute cooldown, eventually reduced by artifact traits. You take 20% less damage, you can use it in a variety of CC, and it's pretty simple, it looks like this, you get all barky and so on. Next up is Rage of the Sleeper, it's a 1.5 minute cooldown, this is our artifact ability, and it prevents 25% of damage you take, so it lowers the damage you take by 25%, and reflects some damage back at the attacker. It looks something like this, you get all big and red, you get this cool little aura. And finally we have Survival Instincts. This is a 4-minute cooldown with 2 charges, and reduces the damage you take by 50% baseline, and then artifact traits will then boost up how much damage it does reduce. Looks like this, very very powerful and potent defensive. As far as utility goes, we have an Interruptive Course and Skull Bash. It has a small range on it, 13 yards, 15-second cooldown. You use it to kick an ability that someone is casting. But for druids, we do have a bit of a range, so it does actually shoot you toward the target, so it can be used as a short charge, like so. Then we've got Stampeding Roar, 2-minute cooldown. Right now I have a talent that's reducing it, but it just roars around you, 10-yard range baseline, and then everyone that it hits, it gets to move fast, like so. So as you can see, it kind of boosted these little trees. If they could move, they'd be moving faster. We also have Dash, which is a 3-minute cooldown. It forces you into cat form, it makes you run very very quickly, so it's a very nice personal speed boost, but it does take you out of bear form. In addition we have our Taunt, our Growl, 8-second cooldown, pretty standard stuff. And then we've got Entangling Roots for CC, which again takes you out of bear form, so you don't use it too often. As you can see, you just cast it, and then it roots the target in place. And then we do have Incapacitating Roar. It's a 30-second cooldown, It disorients everything that it hits within 20 yards or so, and it can be used as an AoE interrupt. It looks something like that. And then we do have Remove Corruption. Now, Remove Corruption just is the spell. It does take you out of air form, so you won't use it too often. But if you need to, it does remove curse and poison effects. And finally, let's mention Rebirth. This is our battle res. It does cost 10 rage, so when you're in bear form, make sure that you have enough rage to use it. But you can use it without being taken out of bear form, so you can battle res people in your party or raid if you need to. As far as passives go, we do have a couple, and the first is Gore. Every time you thrash, swipe, moonfire, or maul, you have a chance to reset the cooldown on Mangle, and if you get this buff, then Mangle will generate 4 additional rage for a total of 9. And then we've got Lightning Reflexes, which just makes you gain dodge equal to the critical strike that you have on your gear. Next, I want to go over your talents. Now, level 15, in general, you're going to want Blood Frenzy or Bristling Fur for survivability. If you don't need those, Brambles can be good for just pure DPS and messing around with that, but it will just come at the cost of rage generation. Now, between these two, Blood Frenzy is generally going to be better on big AoE, so 3+ targets that are constantly there, just for more consistent rage generation, and Bristling Fur acts as kind of a mini cooldown, so if you need that either just for single targets or hard-hitting bosses, which you can get lots of rage from this, then this is your go-to talent. Now level 30 is kind of up to you here. It's a utility tier. I recommend probably Guttural Roars by default, especially in a raid. It gives you a shorter stampeding roar, as well as a bigger radius on it and your CC. And the other option would really be Wild Charge, which you can use just to charge around the battlefield a bit more, but again, totally up to you. Level 45, they all have their uses. I recommend Restoration Affinity in general for survivability purposes, but if you do need more movement speed, Feral Affinity can be quite nice, as well as if you want to Cat Weave, which I'm not going to go over in this video, but if you do want to do that, you have to be Feral Affinity, and that will provide the highest DPS out of bear form if you choose to do that. Balance Affinity can be nice if you need the extra range. You go ahead and take it. Again, all three of these have their uses, so kind of pick what's appropriate to your needs. Level 60, CC tier, so all up to you. I like to go Typhoon by default, but again, it's totally up to you and your situation and what your group needs. At level 75, generally for survivability, I'll recommend Galactic Guardian, as this works both well in single target and AoE situations. Soul of the Forest is comparable on single target, so you get about the same amount of range or rage from it. But as soon as you get more targets, then Galactic Guardian will pull ahead quite significantly. And then Incarnation is your DPS talent here if you really want to go that, and it gives you a big 3-minute cooldown, and you kick a lot of ass while you're in this form. So for DPS or extra threat if you need it, you can take Incarnation. Now at level 90, all three actually have their uses now. Like Guardian of Elune, it's a bit weaker than it used to be, but it's still a nice default choice. And the reason it's a bit weaker is because we don't have Mark of Ursul anymore, so it kind of lost a little bit of value on that. But it's still good. Now Survival of the Fittest, still as good as it ever was when you need it to get extra cooldowns off, like extra survival instincts, or if it allows a cooldown to line up well with a boss ability that you need it for, then this is a very, very powerful choice. And then Earth Warden actually now has some uses on certain bosses or certain situations, mainly to reduce huge auto attack swings by a significant amount. So it does have some niche uses, so don't be afraid to experiment with it if you're getting smacked really, really hard by a boss's auto attacks. Now, level 100, it's kind of generally between Rend and Tear and Pulverize. Now, Lunar Beam does have its uses. It's a nice cooldown, lots of healing, lots of AoE burst damage, and it lines up fairly well with Rage of the Sleeper. So you can just hold Lunar Beam until this is ready, and you'll do a lot of burst damage and healing, self-healing. But in general, you're going to want the consistent damage reduction of one of the other two. So if you're not sure, I do recommend just Rend and Tear. It's completely passive, and with the legs, the legendary legs, it becomes very, very strong. It becomes the best defensive talent in this tier, and the best offensive talent, especially on AoE, but even on single is pretty competitive with Pulverize. Now, if you don't have the legendary legs and you want to maximize your survivability and damage, Pulverize is the way to go. Now, as far as your artifact weapon goes, you can start here and then grab Iron Claws. And then I recommend going to the right and up to your first golden trait. So Wild Flesh, Perpetual Spring, Bloody Paws, Jagged Claws, and Embrace of the Nightmare. And this makes your Regular Sleeper make you deal more damage, get 25% leech, and be immune to CC, so it becomes a very powerful cooldown. After that, I recommend going down and grabbing Gory Fur, so Vicious Bites, Sharpened Instincts, Ursoc's Endurance, and then Gory Fur, which gives your Mangle a chance to proc a buff that reduces the cost of your next Iron Fur by 25%. Then I would grab Reinforced Fur and Adaptive Fur. Adaptive Fur just gives you a chance, when you're taking magic damage, to proc a buff that reduces the damage you take from that element for 15 seconds. Now, if you really want, you can get this first. It is quicker to go, as there's only one thing there, but I do recommend getting Gory Fur first if you have to choose. After that, probably grab Bear Hug. It gives you an increased chance to trigger Gore. And then either Mauler, Bestial Fortitude, or Roar of the Crowd. These are all kind of less useful. If you want to get more defensive, you'd grab Bestial Fortitude first. If you want to go more offensive, you grab Mauler first. And then Roar of the Crowd has some nice utility, but kind of up to you on these last three. They're not super important. Now after that, you'll be 35, so grab Ursoc's Bond. Do your Broken Shore questline, grab the new traits that will be unlocked, and a new point in all of the old 3-point traits. Now at this point I recommend grabbing Fortitude of the Cenarian Circle, then the new traits. So the Moonfire that reduces the damage you take, extra charge of Frenzy Regen, and Positive Outlook. Now this new golden trait gives Thrash a chance to trigger another Thrash, which can then again trigger another Thrash. So very powerful offensive trait. And then at this point it's kind of up to you what you want to do. I probably recommend doing a little bit more damage. Bears tend to have pretty low damage in general, outside of cooldowns and other things. So I do like going for offensive traits afterward, which would be Jagged Claws first, so more Thrash damage, and then Mangle. And then you could probably just focus on defensive stuff after that. Mauler technically will give you a little bit more damage, but you don't use it as often as you might think if you're tanking at all actively. Now, for defensive traits, if you want to focus on that first, grab Ursoc's Endurance first, then Reinforced Fur, and then Wild Flesh, and then Sharpened Instincts, and then Perpetual Spring, and then probably Stam. Just a little bit of a small defensive increase there, and then you can grab the rest of the stuff, offensive and so on. But I really do recommend grabbing some of the offensive stuff first if you can. If not, at least grab it after Ursoc's Endurance and a Reinforced Fur. In terms of relics and what you want to be using, eye level is generally going to be good for you, so the higher the eye level, the better. You get more stamina, more damage just from your weapon eye level being higher and so on. But in terms of damage, Thrash is really strong, so you want Jagged Claws relics if you can, if you want to focus on damage. And Vicious Bites is okay for single target, but obviously Thrash being both AoE and single target and being very strong for both makes this kind of the clear winner for DPS. Now defensively, you're generally going to want Ursoc's Endurance relics, unless you want to get a bunch of haste to kind of make up for it and having more Iron Fur stacks. Additionally, Reinforced Fur can be pretty good as well defensively, but these are kind of the two I would focus on for defensive purposes. And then Wild Flesh, again, not quite as good, but with the 4-piece from Tomb and the 2-piece, it's a little more relevant as you do use more Frenzied Regen. Now, in terms of stat priority, there's a couple ways to go about it. I'm just going to kind of mention the most generic and safe ways to go. If you're going to go defensively, you want to go Versatility, and then Mastery, and then Haste, and then Crit. And then if you want to go offensive, so you just focus on doing the most damage you can as a bear purely, so again, not using Feral Affinity to Cat Weave or Cat DPS at all, then you want Haste, and then Crit, and then Versatility, and then Mastery. Now I have heard of things of like high haste builds to kind of imitate having Ursoc's Endurance relics, getting more Iron Furs, more stacks of it more consistently, and this probably works really well, but if you're not sure, if you're not confident in that build or in playing, then I would recommend going with the generic and defensive stat priority. Again, Versatility, Mastery, Haste, and Crit. But I want to go over your rotation or priority, if you want to call it that. And I'm going to start by talking about the defensive abilities, and I'll get into how to change your DPS rotation or priority system for each kind of scenario. Now, the only active mitigation you have as a druid is Iron Fur. and it costs 45 rage again, and this counts as active mitigation. So if you need for a mechanic to use active mitigation to avoid a debuff, some effect like a knockback in Neltharian's Lair, or just to reduce the damage, Iron Fur is what you press. You can have 100% uptime on this buff, so it's very easy to do that. So use this whenever you need to, whenever you're taking damage, active mitigation, and so on. And remember, it does stack, so use it as many times as you need to when you're tanking and when you're taking physical damage. Now, Frenzy Regen is kind of your other rage spender defensively. You do want to have some sort of tracker, I would recommend. And it's a really potent heal if you use it correctly. So make sure you use it when you have a huge amount of healing stored up. And again, the best way to know is with the tracker. In terms of cooldowns, Barkskin I just consider the cheapest, weakest cooldown. So if you just needed to use it for a little bit to take off the edge of an attack, this is what I go with. But Rage of the Sleeper, despite its short cooldown, is super powerful once you get your Embrace of the Nightmare golden trait. So I use it kind of the same way I use Survival Instincts, except I tend to use this first because it's got a shorter cooldown. So it reduces the damage you take significantly, gives you healing, more damage, and so on. You can use this offensively as well if you're confident that you don't need it to survive, because it does make you do more damage once you get that golden trait. And then Survival Instinct's pretty simple. It's a huge defensive cooldown. You just use it whenever you need to reduce a large hit, or if you're kind of desperate to survive, etc. Now, if you use Bristling Fur as a talent, it is important that you use it when you're being attacked, 1, and 2, make sure that you're taking lots of damage, and don't line it up with other cooldowns if you can help it, because the more damage you take, the more rage you generate, and thus the more use you get out of it. Now, in terms of doing your damage priority in terms of defense, so to generate the most rage possible, you're going to want to do a couple of things. Now, once you have your golden trait over here, you'll want to have Moonfire active all the time. And this is just a good thing to do in general. So you can start a pool with Moonfire. It won't do much rage, but it will get you that dot, so you don't have to do it during your initial opener. And then after that, you're going to want to Mangle, and then Galactic Guardian procs of Moonfire, which give you a lot of rage, and then Thrash, and then again, just swipe to kind of fill in, and of course keep your Moonfire active the whole time. Now, if you're wondering why Mangle over Galactic Guardian, even though Galactic Guardian gives you more rage, there's a couple reasons. 1, if you have a proc of Gore, that's certainly the best because it gives you the most rage, 9 rage off of Mangle instead of 8 off of Galactic Guardian and Moonfire. But also, your golden trait, Gory Fur, allows you to... Mangle has a chance to proc a cheaper Iron Fur, and that is a lot of rage saved. So, in general, it's just easier to think, keep Moonfire up, and then just Mangle, Galactic Guardian, Moonfire, Thrash, and then swipe. In terms of increasing your damage, so focusing purely on DPS output, for single target it's very similar, with one exception. So you still have Moonfire on all the time, so you want that active 100% of the time. Then you want to Mangle, and then Thrash, and then Galactic Guardian, procs of Moonfire, and then swipe. Now, in terms of using Maul, because we are discussing kind of maximizing your damage, Maul basically, if you are not tanking, if you are okay not having Iron Fur up, then instead of swipe, you will weave in Mauls if you have enough rage. So this kind of comes right before Maul, or excuse me, before swipe. So Maul is just one step above swipe in terms of the DPS rotation, if you want to maximize DPS at the cost of survivability. Now for AoB, if you just want to focus purely on DPS, completely just, I don't care about survivability, then you'll be Thrash top priority, number 1, and then swipe. Just spam swipe after. And that's going to do the most damage for you in an AoE situation. Now obviously, in a realistic situation, you'll probably be tanking some of those adds, so you might want to weave in some Mangles, Galactic Guardian, procs of Moonfire, and so on, and then, Iron Furs to survive as well. But basically Thrash is top priority, and then DPS priority would be then swipe at 3+ targets at least. So now, so you can get kind of a better idea of how these kind of work in a real situation, I'll go ahead and go over some footage of me tanking in a Mythic Plus and raid setting, so you guys can get a feel for it and see what I'm thinking and how it works. Alright, so here we are in a Maw of Souls Mythic Plus, and I am using Blood Frenzy because I just think with the trash that it's a good time to use it. A lot of big trash is fortified, and I want the constant rage in. So I Mangle the first thing and then Thrash as soon as the other one gets up, so I can get some aggro on both, get my Iron Fur up, and then just do some damage. So again, Mangle and Thrash kind of top priority, because I want to do some damage as well. but also Moonfire Galactic Guardians defensively. So when they're up here, I will use them. So I'll go ahead and Frenzied Regen there. Lots of healing to be had. I Barkskin just to be safe. I know there's a lot of things happening, a lot of damage coming out, so I Rage as well. Just to be safe, I know it'll be up when I need it in a little bit. So again, just using my Rage on Iron Fur mostly, and just following the kind of basic defensive priority. Slightly, it's kind of a mix between defensive and offensive, I think, for me here. Just Mangle, Thrash a lot, and then Galactic Guardian is still pretty high priority. But again, on an AoE pack, Thrash is super important, so you will see me using that more over Galactic Guardian and Moonfires a lot in this little segment. To finish the ad up here, again, now we're down to 1, so just Mangle first, and then Galactic Guardian, Mangle. And then we move on to the next pack. There's a couple birds here, so I will pause and kill them because I don't want to put extra pulls down when we're fighting those ads, because the space is already kind of limited. So I Thrash to pick up aggro, and then I'll get Iron Fur up, get them killed, heal myself a little bit, and then here I Moonfire to pull, as well as just apply it, and then Thrash to pull aggro. Then Galactic Guardian Moonfires are happening, so I'm using it to get Rage, use Iron Fur, and then again, here I'm kind of prioritizing my Thrash, and then Mangle, and then Moonfire for kind of more defensive purposes. Now, Frenzy Regen when you're low, and you have a big heal coming in, as you can see, I use my Trinket as well, just to kind of stay on top of things and not take a crap ton of damage. I knocked them away from the Sanguine. They weren't in it, I don't think, but I just wanted to be safe. And then here, I could have Frenzy Regen right there. I'm actually too low on Rage is why I don't, but I wanted to. And then here he starts to cast something, and I will interrupt it with an Incapacitating Roar at the end, just to make sure he doesn't get that off, because I think someone was just standing there. I thought they were going to get hit pretty hard. And then you just follow again that basic priority of Mangle, and then Moonfire for defensive things, for defensive reasons, and so on. So it's just that basic thing, and then using your cooldown. So here I know it's going to be a huge pull, so I use Rage immediately on the pull, and then Thrash to get aggro on everything, and then just kind of follow that basic AoE priority. So Thrash being top, and then still being defensive though, because this pack hurts, so I can't just spam swipe instead. So I will be using the Thrash as top priority, then Mangle, then Moonfire, and then Thrash. Now you don't see me use Maul because I had to focus on being defensive and staying alive on most of these, so I couldn't afford to not use, you know, my Rage on Iron Fur rather than on Maul, as well as on Frenzied Regen. So that's basically the premise of the whole thing. For AoE tanking, you just, you know, using your abilities in the order of priority that you need to be, depending on AoE or single target, and then using your Frenzied Regen and Iron Fur as much as possible in good situations. Iron Fur is easy to keep up, just use it all the time, have it up when you're tanking, and then Frenzied Regen when you have big heals that you can potentially do. So here we are at Heroic Fallen Avatar, and I'm taking the boss first, so I'll go ahead and taunt on the pull and Moonfire just to get that rolling, because that is kind of your top DPS priority in a way, and then I'll just Rage of the Sleeper for extra aggro, basically, and also just to kind of mitigate the first hits, as I do not have Iron Fur right away. You don't have to do that, but you could, and you could also alternatively use Barkskin or something light on the cooldown, but I'm just following the defensive kind of single target priority, which is of course to have Moonfire up the whole time, and then Mangle, then Moonfire with Galactic Guardian, and then Thrash, and then Swipe. Now you notice that I'm just using Iron Fur a bunch, and I use Bristling Fur pretty liberally here because there's nothing in particular I want to save it for. Because I want to stay in here in this magic damage, I just use a big cooldown, a Trinket that I have, and then Frenzy Regen to heal up all the damage it does. And I'm just doing a defensive priority, always using Iron Fur because I'm pretty much always taking damage from melee swings and physical stuff. Now here I realize I go the wrong way, so I Stampeding Roar to get into the correct position, and this is a really good ability to use, especially if you've taken the Guttural Roar's talent. Now, the rotation is pretty simple, so I'm not going to go over it over and over, but it's just, again, the defensive priority. And really all the tanking is, especially in raids, is to look at what cooldowns are available, what kind of damage is coming in, and maybe plan the usage out. As I mentioned, Bristling Fur I'm just kind of using as a basic small like rage generator, and I could have then gone for Blood Frenzy instead if I thought that, you know, for this fight with multiple adds and with no particular time to use Bristling Fur, but it's still pretty decent. Now, we got Rupture Realities again, and I realize, okay, this magic damage is going to take a lot, so I'll get out a little bit and pop Rage of the Sleeper, and then Frenzied Regen the damage right after, to make sure I don't die. And then just kind of keep going like that. Now, you notice I haven't used Survival Instincts at all, I haven't used Maul, and I wouldn't use Maul here necessarily, unless perhaps I got to a point in which I was tanking Maiden or had aggro on her, but she was in cleansing protocol, because then I wouldn't actually be taking hits from stuff, and then I wouldn't need to mitigate. So that's pretty much how it goes. Use your cooldowns, pre-plan them if you can, so plan ahead, or if you need to do some practice runs on the bosses and get used to when you think you might need these, and maybe save one cooldown for an oh crap moment, like how I'm saving Survival Instincts, because I know down in phase 2 we might get a little messy. I might need a little bit of extra defensive oomph to stay alive. Now, in terms of macros and add-ons, I don't really use any macros on my Druid, but I do use a bunch of add-ons you might have noticed during the video, Weak Auras 2 being the most prominent. I use it a lot for a lot of things. It's very powerful, and basically you can do anything you want with it if you know how. But I use it for cooldown tracking, stack tracking, duration timers, my offensive abilities, so I don't have to look. I use a rage bar as well. There's all sorts of stuff you can do with it. I also do use details for damage and healing meter and so on. I like it the most out of the 3, Recount, Skada, and Details. It does take a little bit more setup, so do be prepared for that when you first download it. But I think it is, for me, the best. I like it a lot. For action bars, I'm using Bartender 4. You can move a bunch of bars around, everything. You can also set up which ones are active, and how big they are, what kind of format, how many buttons, how many rows. You can mess around with stuff, and you can of course set key bindings to specific tunes or just across your characters. A lot of stuff you can do with it. It's a very nice add-on for action bars. The flashing icon in the middle of the screen is Doom Cooldown Pulse. I just mentioned it for people who are curious. You can do the same effects in Weak Auras 2, so I don't necessarily recommend the add-on itself, but it is easy. I haven't touched the settings once, so it's pretty easy fire and forget add-on if you want that, if you need that. For kind of cooldown tracking, I do have Exorcist raid tools, as you can see here, and mostly I use it for raid cooldowns. You can configure this yourself, set up which ones you want. You can basically set the order using priority. You can do stuff like battle res, trackers, raid inspects, raid checks for like food flask and so on, ways to invite people and all sorts of things, who pulled, etc. Lots of cool stuff you can do here. I also do have ORA3, which is actually what I use for the cooldown, or excuse me, battle res cooldown timer, because I just like the way it looks better. That's just me. But this one also has alerts, so you can do like combat alerts like interrupts, pet taunts, dispels, and so on in your chat box, so you can see what's going on. They also have other things like cooldowns as well, consumable checks, and so forth. So that's pretty much it for this video. If you liked it, feel free to hit it with a like. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave those in the comment section below, or catch me on my stream at twitch.tv/Marilyn, and I can chat to you there. And if you want to see when I post new content or new videos like this, then feel free to subscribe to the channel so you know when I do post those. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.